You mentioned the first job you had was selling newspapers for the Daily Forward.
Yeah.
You must have had other jobs after that maybe you could recall. Then you once told me you peddled, you gave away tickets for a fortune teller, didn't you?
Oh, yeah, that's right. When I was a little boy at that time, we lived on Lewis Street, and Lewis Street was a cross street, and the lengthwise streets, but the long streets was Rivington Street on one street, and the Lansing Street on the other side. And between the Lansing and the Rivington Street, there was those side streets. And Lewis Street was one street. After Lewis Street came Cannon Street, and after Cannon Street came Columbia Street, and after Columbia Street came Sheriff Street, then came Willard Street, and then came Attorney Street, then came Clinton Street. All these were side streets. Then after running some more streets, but I just come over there. I'll just tell you up to Clinton Street. So now, we were talking about Rivington Street. So when I used to walk over to Rivington Street, and somehow or other, I don't know how I got acquainted, but I got acquainted with a woman by the name of Pollack, Mrs. Pollack. Now, this Mrs. Pollack was living on Rivington Street, and Rivington Street had a lot of these. Rivington Street was known as the pushcart street because on both sides of the streets there were those pushcarts, and each pushcart had different materials for sale. Most of them they had vegetables, bananas, peaches, oranges, according to what was in season. Bananas, tomatoes, everything in those days, and oranges. In those days, everything was sold not by the pound, but by the piece. You can buy an orange for 2 or 3 cents. You can buy an apple for maybe a penny or something. It was everything was, the bananas also were very cheap, maybe a penny or 2 cents a piece. So that particular block had pushcarts on both sides of the street, and the stores, being most of the houses over there in those days were all tenement houses on both sides of the streets. Tenant houses, they were high, tall houses. They were about at least 4 flights. Most of them were 4 flights or more. Sometimes even 5 flights, but 4 flights surely. Where people lived up at the first floor, second floor, third floor, fourth floor. But the first floor was really up the stoop. You had to walk up the stoop maybe 10 or 15 steps to get into the first floor, because all these buildings also had basements, and the basements were about 4 or 5 steps down, and they were also apartments where people lived there. Now in Rivington Street, I must have got acquainted with somebody, and I was told that there's a Mrs. Pollack there who tells fortunes, fortune teller. So she used to, she had cards printed somehow, and she needed somebody to give out the cards to advertise her business that she's a fortune teller. And she used to tell fortunes mostly to women, because there were most of the girls there they were also imported, also were immigrants who had come from different parts of Europe, mostly the Jewish area, and they all were on the Lower East Side. Was really a Jewish section, more like a ghetto, if you want to think about it, how it was. It must have been. Anyways, I was told to go up to Mrs. Pollack, and she used to give me a bunch of circulars, like little cards. They were cards, and she says that I should give them out. I should give them out to the girls when they come out of the subway. The subway station was the Lansing Street. Girls used to work in the factories, and a lot of them lived on the Lower East Side. So when the trains came in with the passengers, there was a big crowd coming out from the subway, and a lot of them were girls. And every girl I used to hand out one of those cards. And from those cards, they'd have an address, and they'd all be able to. And a lot of them came to Mrs. Pollack because she has her address on there on Rivington Street, and she used to tell their fortunes. She was a fortune teller. So how did she tell her fortunes? Through the cards. She used to tell the cards and how the cards fall. She used to tell them that they're going to get married. This is going to be this one. She was pretty good at telling fortunes, and her telling fortune was with cards. And she charged 25 cents. I remember she charged 25 cents for telling the fortunes. And if they wanted to have a better fortune told, she would charge them 35 cents, but that would be on the hand. She'd look on the hand where the lines were on the hand, and she'd tell them a fortune. It was a little bit more in detail than with the cards. And she must have made a good name for herself, because she was always busy. She always had 5 or 6 girls, mostly girls in the marriageable age, and they're waiting for their next to hit a fortune. That was one of the, and she had a son. One son. She had a lot of children, but most of them were still in Europe. But they had one son that was living with her. His name was Izzie Pollack. He was as I recall, he was a very blondish fellow, very handsome kind of a fellow, and I got acquainted with him. I liked him. He was like a big brother to me. And when I used to come there to get the cards, and he'd be in the bedroom, and then this here girls were sitting in the living room there. It's like it's like a kitchen, but in those days, the way they had the apartments, there was plenty of room for them to sit down, and they wait for their next. Now, Izzie Pollack had to keep out of the way from his mother telling fortunes, so he used to stay in the bedroom. So in the bedroom, he had a light there, as far as I understand, and then he had a light there, and he had a phonograph. He had a phonograph. In those days, there was a phonograph with a big horn. You know, you turn the handle, and then you play the record. And he used to play some records that he had that they used to get. And he used to play it on that Victor. Victor was the name of the dog picture. Victor Victrola, and that was a box and a handle and a big horn, and he used to play it. But